gentlemen, if you've just walked in through the door, might I kindly ask us to quickly find our seats? I do appreciate your attention. May I kindly ask us to please take our seats? To the right-hand side towards the back, can I kindly ask you please to take your seats? I appreciate that very much. Thank you for your kind attention, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to the second part of our plenary session today as we continue our program of the fourth South African Investment Conference. I hope that the breakaway sessions opened up the space for robust engagement, real debate, the sharing and debating of ideas for progress. And we really appreciate those of you who leaned in and really participated meaningfully. A big thank you to our moderators as well, who led those particular sessions. In this afternoon's session, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to kick it off with a panel discussion that is going to zoom in on the African opportunity, really looking at South Africa and beyond. It's my pleasure to hand over to the newly appointed Director General at DIRCO, who's going to moderate that session. If you're looking behind me, DG's panelists are already here, so I'm going to give him the floor in a moment. But what we're also going to do, and I hope as I'm speaking that those still standing at the back would oblige by giving me their attention and taking their seats as well. I appreciate each and every one of you. Thank you. What we're also going to do as well, ladies and gentlemen, is that we're going to continue with the investment announcements. The list is still long, the announcements are still plenty, and we look forward to sharing the stage with the President once again as he acknowledges those commitments. But more importantly, the President is also going to share some brief reflections at the end of those commitments. And then, of course, ladies and gentlemen, we'll take a very short refreshment break before we make our way to the dinner. I will give you some announcements around the dinner, but suffice to say at this point that the President is hosting the dinner, so we really hope that we're going to see you at that point. And so, to welcome DG Zain Dango to the floor as he takes us through a moderated conversation on the African opportunity. DG, please.
Thank you, Program Director, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is the last session before the President speaks and the announcement on the investments are made. So we'll try and keep it short and sharp. I'm going to introduce our panel of esteemed business leaders in South Africa, but who are also thought leaders. We have with us Mr. Shamil Jussup, who's the CEO of Vodacom. We have Ms. Nolo Topejani, who's the head of Sub-Saharan Africa for KFC. We have Mr. Tertius Carstens, who's the Sub-Saharan head for PepsiCo. Mr. Anand Singh, who's a well-known filmmaker and the head of Video Vision. And Mr. T.P. Nchocho, who's the head of Industrial Development Corporation. After this, I'm just going to call them on their first names. We've made those agreements. Okay. I come from an environment, and my boss is here, the Minister Pando, where people really are vested with their titles, so there's no excellencies here today. Thanks. And welcome to this very, very important panel. And I'd like to thank all of you for taking the time to share your thoughts and experiences with us today. We're not going to have any questions from the participants. We're going to be engaging only with the panelists. And I'm going to pose 3 questions to each of you to guide these discussions. And these questions are just, to guide you. You can use your discretion on how you're going to answer them. So we have a time constraint, so I trust you'll be frugal with your time, but not with the content. So the first question I would like your thoughts on is, what is the African opportunity, and what does this offer South African businesses? And I'm going to start with you, Shamil. I think there's a mic right next to you.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Is that clear? So for me, the African opportunity is the opportunity to basically invest into Africa from South Africa as a hub. And I think you've seen a number of big businesses internationally using South Africa as a hub because of the legal financial frameworks that we have. However, the environment is becoming more competitive, and I think one of the big things that needs to be done is we need to seriously look at our bilateral investment agreements, we need to look at our double taxation agreements, and so on, so that we increase South Africa's attractiveness as the hub from which to invest into Africa. So, you know, I think that's a big opportunity. Of course, it gives South African businesses the opportunity to, you know, to expand into Africa and to grow their footprint. And of course, those revenues flow back into South Africa. So it's a good growth opportunity for South Africa. And we've got fantastic tech, we've got fantastic businesses here that can expand through the continent. And it's very, very exciting to be able to do that. Secondly, I think as we move into a platform world, there's an opportunity to take South African tech throughout the continent. So also important for us to focus on things like being able to have cloud-based services so you can deploy in multiple countries, I think becomes a very important part going forward. But the ability to leverage some of our platforms, financial services is an example. So in Vodacom today, we have 64 million financial service customers across the continent. And, you know, I think that becomes an important part of leveraging those platforms that we built. And there's such great tech in South Africa. So an example would be, you know, we invested into a company called IoT.next. And we're now selling our services in Germany, the UK, Netherlands, but also in Africa. So the African opportunity is to pick up those skills, those hubs, that tech, that's African tech, and be able to expand it beyond our borders.
Thank you, Shamil. Nolo, the perspective from KFC?
Thank you, Zain. I'm going to take it from our sector, right? And I think KFC is a very, very good case study. As you know, KFC is a subsidiary of Yum Brands, which is operating in 145 countries. We currently have 125,000 restaurants, of which in the continent we've got 1,235 restaurants across the continent. If we're talking about South Africa being a hub, that is an example. Because we were able to use South Africa as a base to then grow our footprint into Africa. We are now in 23 countries, including South Africa. We've got 51 franchisees. As you know, it's a franchise model. We've hired 35,000 people. So that's the model that actually talks to all the challenges that we've been talking about the whole day. And I'm really looking forward to hear from the panel members about the opportunity. So this is the opportunity that I'm talking about. Let's talk about the barriers and how we can overcome them.
Thank you, Nolo. That's the next question we're going to be addressing. Tertius, over to you from the PepsiCo perspective.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much, Zain. PepsiCo obviously is a consumer goods company. So for us, the opportunity in Africa lies with its people. 1.2 billion people call Africa home. And for a consumer goods company, that portends growth and opportunity. And we wish to and look forward keenly to expand on what we already do in Africa. We operate in 20 countries. We export to 30 within the African continent, very much anchored in South Africa, as well as Egypt. And we will leverage that as our base of capability and competence.
Thank you, Tertius. Anand, from the perspective of an artist and a filmmaker and a business person.
Thanks, Zain, and thanks to my fellow panelists. You know, as I listen to all of you and think back on 30 years ago, we made a little movie here called Sarafina. And at that time, the continent you couldn't protect your IP, but the whole continent saw the film, and we were, as filmmakers, very happy that happened. Today, you've got technology, which is represented right here. You've got streaming services that are represented right there, and the opportunities that come with all of that for African storytellers is immense. And I think when you look at South Africa, we have been pioneering filmmaking to a very substantial degree over the past 40, 50 years. And this was the best kept secret in the world. When filmmakers came here from the US or elsewhere, France, and they saw, wow, we have great technical, we have great creative, we have great locations, they just fell in love. And the thing that was lacking was infrastructure. So we created the Cape Town Film Studios, and as you heard from Netflix this morning, there's a 900 and some odd million rand commitment, and they've been shooting there for several years now. And you know, that adage of you build it and they will come is proof, the proof is right there. And following on that, we're repeating that in Durban, and that's what we announced today. But I think the other part of the story is when you look at KFC and PepsiCo and Vodacom, where you've got content, you look at your commercials, and those commercials, you know, PepsiCo spend about $50 million on a commercial for 60 seconds on the Super Bowl. $50 million on a 60-second commercial. KFC, I have no idea your budgets, but they're great storytelling. And I think the opportunities with African storytellers is so important. And the statistic I heard today, when one person watches Netflix in South Africa, 26 people around the world are watching that same show in their algorithm methodology. So content today, people are watching more films and shows and other activities than ever before. That quiet time that we used to have when, you know, you went home at 5 o'clock and you did whatever you did, and then you know, went to dinner and then you went to bed. That's gone. People have migrated to different opportunities. So that is an opportunity for South Africa and the continent. Thank you.
Thank you, Anand. And before we get into the second question, I learned a lot today in the debriefing session. Did I forget you, Tipi?
You're forgiven, sir.
Am I forgiven? Thanks.
No, I just wanted to make a brief comment on the opportunity. Point number one, my colleague here has already appreciated the demographic dynamics of the continent. I think point number two, an obvious one, the natural endowments of the continent, but specifically I'm thinking here about those specialty minerals that are used in modern technology applications, you know, going into microchips and various other applications, including PV panels and things like that. So resources beyond just bulk commodities. I think the other thing which is interesting from where we sit is the evolution of the trade patterns between African countries and the rest of the world, where there's greater integration with the South, more and more South-to-South trade, less and less dependence maybe on the traditional markets of the Americas and Europe. Of course, this is presenting an opportunity, I believe, for South African business, because the level of integration, as well as we know, on the continent is still low, around, I don't know, 15, 16% intra-trade in the region, whereas our competing jurisdictions are trading at intra-trade indices in the order of 60, 70% and beyond. So yes, it is a deficit, but it also represents an opportunity on the upside. The one thing that we also observe as a development finance institution is the evolution of capital markets, better financial services, as my colleague has spoken, and of course the digital issue, which my colleague can talk more about. And these are factors that are giving impetus, I believe, to the growth story on the African continent and presenting best opportunities for South African companies to trade into the continent. Thank you.
Thank you, TP. And for my sins and for overlooking you, you're going to answer the next question first. Mr. Wamkele Nene, the Secretary General of the African Free Trade Area, has stated that the ACTFA offers Africa an opportunity to confront the significant trade and economic development challenges of our time. What do you see as the opportunities arising from the ACTFA? And I'm going to add a second question to that. Do you want to answer that one first before I add the second one?
Maybe I should.
Good, go ahead.
The Secretary General is doing a good job, and I think his message is well stated. The opportunity, I think, in the first instance lies in the potential for diversification of African economies. I mean, the opportunity to produce manufactured goods for a population, as we said, which is growing and improving in terms of income levels, and therefore demands for a diverse set of products and so on. I think the second opportunity, I believe, which has not been adequately addressed, is the opportunity to improve and invest in agriculture and food systems. We are looking at some projects at the Industrial Development Corporation for creating storage logistics infrastructure for moving food and medicines on a stored and secure and safe basis. I touched on the issue of specialty minerals, but the other one I want to talk to is the energy deficit. It is there, it needs to be addressed as part of the infrastructure equation in order to enable investment. But I think the days are over for about building 500 megawatts power stations and things like that. I think what we see is a move towards distributed energy systems, and I think technology is providing opportunity in that regard. So yeah, let me pause there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, TP. Anand, from a filmmaker and an artist perspective, what do you see as the opportunities?
You know, when you look around today and look at filmmakers, you have South African filmmakers working in Nigeria. You have Nigerian filmmakers here. It's the whole continent. Everybody's knows each other. They want to do certain stories. They find the right places, the way to get it made. One of the challenges that we have is we have co-productions with many countries, Italy, France, Canada, etc. But there's no formality on the African arrangements of partnerships, etc. And I think that needs to be worked on, but clearly as the creative community and as filmmakers or content aggregators and creators, they will find a way, because that's the only way you can get your films made. It's hard, and if you've got to go to South Africa or you've got to go to Nigeria, that's what you will do. And that's the opportunity that now exists.
Thank you. Tertius, as a head of a multinational, what do you see as the opportunities? And the other two multinationals must be ready to answer that question as well.
Yeah, thank you, Zain. And in the context, to quote a colleague of mine, we make stuff and we move it around. So in that context, the expectation is clear that the agreement will, over time, allow for a reduction in trade barriers, also an harmonization of trade barriers across the continent, but also non-tariff trade barriers. Now, for a food and beverage company like us, this will induce the potential to provide market access and to move goods around the continent, thereby also providing certainty for investment, specifically in terms of location on the continent. If there's freedom of movement or more ease of movement, your certainty about investment is clearer. So that's an upside that we foresee. But it will also provide opportunities to scale existing infrastructure and to optimize and gain efficiency from existing infrastructure and distribution networks. But ultimately, in the sector and space that we operate, it will improve availability of consumer goods and, in our space, nutrition in general. And that will be great for the African continent, in our view.
Thank you, Tertius. Nolo, you next.
You know what, it's so interesting that we're talking from different sectors, right? So those are the three things that I was going to talk about, which are quite different from what Mr. Nchocho spoke about, right, in terms of the opportunities that you see. Trade barrier is huge with us. I'm not even going to start with that. I want to start with what is very close to my heart, which is people and skills, right? We've got people that are educated, people that are passionate, people that are just waiting for opportunities. And because of barriers around movement of talent and skills, it becomes difficult for us to equip them, because as you know, our model is we work with partners that are in markets. We have to equip them, ensure that they can execute these world-class operations to the standards that they're supposed to. But then if it's difficult for us to inject that talent, for us to drive that talent and not be allowed to go and transfer skills, then it becomes a challenge, which hinders growth. And I want to give you an example. So one of our markets that is really growing, and it's no surprise that it's our biggest market, is in the Eastern Africa, which we opened 10 years back, and I'm very passionate about it because I was there. We started with the guys, and because there were no barriers, we actually executed the model exactly the way it was. We trained the guys, we went through the development space, which then allowed them to grow in terms of multiplying stores, in terms of employment in the market, obviously impacting the market. And we know that we have the youth population that is growing immensely, and that's where we play. The second part is there were no barriers around localization because our model is that of value, right, addition. So because we are allowed to import inputs without high taxes, without high levies, it was easy to localize, driving that model. I'm talking about a market that is 80% localized, which then impact other sectors. Sectors around manufacturing, centers around agriculture, centers around, and even small sectors. I mean, the nature of our businesses, you know, it's quality of product. Your fresh produce, which is your farmers, your upcoming farmers that we develop and capacitate to grow the market. And hence I'm saying that's an example of a market that do not have these trade barriers, that is that's showing that growth can happen based on that.
Shamil, the opportunities?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's very encouraging, and I think it's a very good initiative. I just say, you know, let's not spend the next couple of years talking about it. Let's get it implemented, and you know, and then of course it will improve from there. So that's the first part. The second thing I think that's becoming extremely important is that it talks to technology, and the move of physical goods is extremely important. But you also need to make sure that it extends into as we go into the technological world, that it's catering for that. So an example, Africa needs to allow for cloud-based services, because then you can fully harness the power of the hyperscalers and, you know, things like AWS and Google and so on and so on. So that's one part of it. I think that's extremely important. But also, I think the protections that need to be afforded as you go into a technology world, you're not necessarily moving physical goods, but your services are done over the platform. These platforms are enabling technologies. So an example would be in telecoms, you need the underlying telecom infrastructure in a country for a country to succeed, just like you need railways and power and water and so on and so on. So it's one of the underlying technologies that is required. So it's important that we also build in protections around these things, so that, because you also become easy targets. So when governments are short of cash, they go to the platforms first and tax them. But it can also cause a lot of damage. You know, so financial services is an example. And suddenly you decide, look, you want to change the way you tax it. We had one recently where volumes dropped by 40% because, you know, they decided, okay, we'll put a nice tax on top of mobile money. And overnight, that formalization of an informal economy stops. So you put 10 years of hard work and it gets destroyed. And I think those protections, as you go into a platform world, will become extremely important and needs to be built into these trade arrangements.
Thank you, Shamil. Both you and Nolo have pointed out some of the key barriers to harnessing these opportunities. You've given us some indication of some of the levers to overcome these. Shamil, from your perspective, the two key things that you would suggest in terms of overcoming some of the barriers you've just highlighted?
Well, I think more cohesiveness between governments, you know, across the continent, understanding what these underlying infrastructures are. So if you want to drive digital inclusion, you can't put a huge price duties on smartphones, as an example, would be a classical part. So you need to understand what is it that you're trying to drive. And I think digitization of the continent is going to be extremely important if we're going to take full advantage of it. And then, as we build platforms in is those protections that need to be built in. Also, I think it presents a big opportunity for people to now sell their products across borders. So as we move into a world where we can take away some of the trade barriers, we also need to make sure that we're not adding barriers into the platforms that will provide that service. So you want to, if you're based in Nairobi and you want to sell your services in South Africa, you should be able to do that. And the platforms gives you the ability, and of course the logistics will be an important part. So I think logistical support, the movement of the goods itself, but also the tariffs and duties, but also the protections that are provided to the platforms.
Nolo, you want to expand on some of the steps we need to overcome some of the barriers from within your sector?
And look, I think if you really listen to it, and I've been listening to the panels throughout the day, we kind of know exactly what is it that we're supposed to do, and it's around the trade restrictions and movement of inputs, movement of goods, and really understanding what is it that we want to drive, because that will impact the economy in a broader way, not only one sector. I think the other thing that I think we didn't touch on is how that makes us competitive globally. The fact that we can then start exporting as well. So because of all these barriers, it's difficult to do that, and it's difficult for us. Because remember, when you're competitive, then it means you drive demand, and then you drive standards, which then makes our economy more, people would want to come and invest.
Stipe, you want to add to what Nolo has said from?
Yes, maybe 2 or 3 things. From a financial instruments perspective, I think as Africa begins to trade more with itself, one of the things that needs to be improved is the kind of funding instruments that enable trade between countries or trade between companies, because actually that's where trade happens, between enterprises. So because South Africa and Africa as a whole is dominated by small businesses, as a lot of companies, instruments such as credit, letters of credit to enable, assurance given to counterparties that they will be paid for goods supplied. For those who export goods, insurance perhaps to manage risks that might be prevalent in certain jurisdictions. So in this regard, for instance, we are having a working group with our colleagues at ECIC to look at this. But it has to be beyond South Africa, because in the context of the free trade agreement, the same kind of instrumentation has to be expanded to the rest of the continent. The second thing, which I think is going to prove a little hard to address, is issues of currency risks and repatriation of money in the currency that is required. We have experienced this as the IDC, where from certain jurisdictions we have invested, and when either debt repayments or dividends are to be paid back, there's not enough forex in a country and things like that. So I don't have a particular solution to that particular one, but it is a matter that has to be attended to, I think, collectively by the leadership of the continent. Then the last one probably is the harmonization of trade rules. I mean, to the point that Shamil was talking about in regarding tariffs or rules of origins regarding products and things like that. But all these are things that are being attended to, and I think can be improved as, to your point, the implementation of the free trade agreement unfolds. Thank you.
Thanks, Tertius. You were nodding in violent agreement with him there. So
Yeah,
if you can expand
I
on that.
fully agree with the last point you raised, TP, is the clarity on the harmonization of existing and regional trade agreements with the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, and what that might portend in time. So that's important to solve. Again, perhaps a bit more on a practical, physical level. again referring to moving stuff around, is we should guard and we should also attend to non-trade tariff barriers that might emerge. And it's sometimes simple things like conflicting product standards, which are very simple to solve from a technical point of view, but very difficult in a practical sense. So we should really attend to that as well. And then also to solve the more practical stuff like just custom delays. You know, we move food around. You can't sit at the customs gate for 2 weeks with stuff that might perish. And to the last point, we must move with all possible speed that we can to get to implementation and action.
Anand, in the film industry, what are the barriers and how do we overcome them?
So first, I'll solve TP's problem. Why don't you just create an African Bitcoin? You know, one of the things that we have specifically in South Africa is a film rebate incentive. And one of the challenges over the past 3 or 4 years with companies that have come here, and we are competing with countries all around the world that are giving incentives from 25 to 40% for local production. Because the money that is spent in whichever country, say in South Africa, if they spend R1 million, the multiplier effect is 7 times because, you know, it's 7 people that are not really in the film business, but they are hotels, security, catering, etc. Now, over the past 4 years, a lot of the companies that have come here and came out of choice in preference to Louisiana or Canada had many challenges trying to secure their payments. And it became a huge challenge. It went to courts in many instances. And this is not good reputationally for us. And it seems like those issues are being resolved now. And I think on the flip side of that, an experience that I had personally, it was a 20-year battle to try and get the studios in Durban sorted out through a legal process. And the matter could have been dealt with a lot more efficiently. But nonetheless, I think these are challenges that we've experienced. We've come over them, and we need to learn from them and move on. Thank you.
Thank you, Anand. We've dealt with these sort of guided questions part of our discussion, and thank you for those very interesting reflections. I think it's very, very useful for all of us in the room who's working on some of these issues to take forward. And perhaps people can pick on your brains individually after this, because we're not taking questions from the floor. I'm going to ask each one of you to give us some concluding remarks, and here's the opportunity to say things that the questions didn't allow you to say. And you can pick and choose a couple of things that you think that this particular audience really needs to hear. We'll start with you, Anand.
Well, I think, you know, you've got captains of industry, you've got government, you've got everybody here that could actually make a difference. And as I said at the outset, South Africa was the best kept secret. I think Africa is still a best kept secret, but its potential as a consumer, potential as a resource base, and the potential of the people. And I think that's the most important thing, that we have amazing people on this continent. No matter where in the continent you go, you'll find people that are doing amazing things, and we don't celebrate that enough. And I think that's vitally important. And to close with that, I look at Korea, South Korea, and 15 years ago, they had no film industry. And they invested in their industry. 3 years ago, they won several Oscars, including Best Picture, for a Korean language film. Squid Game was on Netflix, the highest watched content ever to be on Netflix. And language is no barrier. So the potential that we have needs to be harnessed, supported, and celebrated, and we can do that better. Thanks.
Tertius, over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. My view remains that it will facilitate and provide opportunity for market access in its simplest form. And for businesses like PepsiCo to fulfill its ambition to grow and to transform, absolutely, obviously with the clear intent to do it so responsibly, to inspire positive change for the planet and its people. That's our ambition. But we understand that it's a very ambitious project that we're busy with, and that a lot of detail and implementation still has to be sorted. But we must remember that it holds the potential to improve livelihoods in Africa, and that should be our ultimate goal.
Thank you, Tertius. Tipi, over to you.
Yes, quickly. I would appeal to both South African business as well as government and other entities like ourselves to play more aggressively, to play more on the front foot, as they say, because the observations on the ground is that we might be overtaken if we are not careful. If we don't play with aggression, if we don't play with intent, we will be outsmarted by the competition. It is a competitive world out there, and it requires playing on the front foot. Thank you.
Thanks. Nolo, followed by Shamil.
Sure. Look, we remain very ambitious about our growth into new markets into Africa, even existing ones, and the growth there. And I agree with you, Mr. Nchoji. We need to act with agency and be agile. You know, I've seen with what happened with COVID, how we were able to realize it quickly. We were talking about it from a digital point of view, realizing there's consumer shifts, and how that actually created new platforms from a delivery point of view, which is a new channel that increased sales. But if we're not agile, if we are going to be talking about it all the time, knowing what needs to be done, and we don't take action, then we are going to be overtaken. We need to unlock supply chain. That's our biggest challenge. I mean, if you say to me what doesn't make me sleep at night is the fact that you will have our products sitting at the port because of trade restrictions or because a permit was not signed, bureaucracy and red tape. Those things we need to talk about, we need to solve, and then we need to make sure that we go into Africa and make Africa rise.
Shamil, you have the last word.
For me, it's a few things. I think, firstly, we need to recognize now that we're in a much more competitive environment. South Africa, years gone by, was the preferred route into Africa. That's changing. And so we need to increase the attractiveness of South Africa as a destination, whether that be incentives and tax incentives that are given, whether it's the bilateral trade agreements, whether it's the double taxation agreements. What are those enablers, and who are we competing against? Recently we looked at a transaction of whether you house a transaction through the Netherlands or through South Africa. It's substantially worse to do it through South Africa. That should not be the case. We need to make sure that we've basically, creating that South Africa becomes a hub rather than, the Netherlands or Mauritius or any other destination for that matter. And part of that means our regulatory parts, when people want to invest in the country, that we speed up the approval processes. That we look at, that we need to incentivize people to come and invest. And then also as the new technologies come, like 5G and so on, are we doing enough to attract people to come and develop here, or biotech and so on, and creating these hubs like you see happening in Singapore and in the UAE as an example. So for me, that's an extremely important part and a challenge for us. And I think the second part is really about partnering. We exist, to connect people and to improve lives. And we want to use technology to solve various different issues, whether it's improving agriculture or distribution of vaccines, like we're doing now with the vaccine distribution in South Africa, which is on our platform, and so on. Is how can we partner together with my fellow panelists as well, but also around the room to drive more connectivity on the one side, but also that we use the power of these platforms to really deal with some problems, whether it's education or agriculture and so on. So we'd like to, under our program called Africa Connect, to invite to partner with us to be able to provide these solutions.
Thank you, Shamil, and thank you to all the panelists. We've come to the end of our discussion. I think I've certainly learned a lot, and I'm sure the participants have taken a lot with them as well. So I'd like to thank you for your valuable time. I just learned one valuable thing about competition today. Don't walk into a Vodacom boardroom wearing a yellow tie. I've made up for that by using the red notebook. Okay. So thank you all. Thank you very much for your time. And I'm going to hand over to the program
Thanks, Zane.
director.
Ladies and gentlemen, I felt that that round of applause was a little bit lukewarm. Can we just give them a bit more energy, please? Thank you very much. Thank you very much to our panelists. Thank you very much to our DG for an excellent moderating job. And as we welcome His Excellency President Ramaphosa as he's coming back now into plenary to join us, might I also ask that all of the investors that are going to be participating now in the commitment session, kindly please note there are seats reserved for you in the front. So if you're sitting somewhere at the back, please kindly note this invitation that you can come to the front to my right-hand side. We have seats that are allocated for you. We are going to take a moment now before we continue with our second part of our investment session. And allow our guests who've just walked in to take their seats. And we're going to proceed with the investments for this afternoon. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. President, I'm not going to allow you to sit any longer on your seats. I'm going to ask you once more to please kindly join us up on stage. We're going to go directly into the second round of investments at this point, and we're going to repeat exactly the process that we did earlier on, ladies and gentlemen. I will call up the commitments in clusters according to sectors. I'm going to ask once again that we exercise the same agility, the same speed that we used earlier. It's a fist pump, it's an elbow bump, it's a quick hello, and of course we have our official photographers in the front, and then we will hear from the President after that. And so, ladies and gentlemen, maybe let's give our Mr. President a round of applause so he can come and join us. Thank you, sir. I'm going to maneuver my way this way. Thank you. Kindly please stand, sir. Thank you very much. Much appreciated. Ladies and gentlemen, we're starting off with the French. A collective of French companies, through the coordination of the French Chamber of Commerce in South Africa, is committing to invest 50 billion rand in a number of sectors across South Africa, including in energy. Let's give them a big round of applause, please. Merci beaucoup to the gentleman on stage. We're moving on now to metal fabrication. Thank you very, very much. Mr. President, we're moving on now to metal fabrication, which we know is the backbone of the heavy industries. And so we're really excited to highlight 7 investments in this area this evening. Ladies and gentlemen, for your attention, please. Hangda Steel from the People's Republic of China is investing 300 million rand in a steel plant in Tabanchu in the Free State province.
Wow. In the Free State. Excellent.
Thank you very much. As I'm going to be very agile and scanning the room if a representative is present. Allow me to move on to Highveld Robust Steel, which is a black industrialist investing 800 million rand in a steel and vanadium manufacturing plant in Mpumalanga. Ladies and gentlemen, Nyanza Light Metals is a black industrialist investing 5 billion rand in titanium dioxide pigment manufacturing in the Richards Bay Industrial Development Zone in KZN. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, we're staying in the metal fabrication sector, and I'm going to SA Steel Mills, who are also a black industrialist, investing an additional 300 million rand in their steel production in Gauteng. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, we're moving on to SCORE South Africa, who are today committing their investment of 2 billion rand towards the expansion of 2 billion rand towards the expansion of their steel manufacturing plant in Gauteng. Ladies and gentlemen, we move swiftly along. I'm moving on to Veer Steel Mills, who are part of the Alfeco Group, today committing their investment of 3.5 billion rand in a steel manufacturing plant in Gauteng. And we are closing off the metal fabrication sector with a commitment from the United Arab Emirates, and this is Velocity Ventures, investing 470 million rand in an aluminium and steel plant in Gauteng. Thank you very much, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, we're moving on to what we have classified, Mr. President, as other manufacturing. And in this space, we are lifting the diverse set of expertise, and this is reflected in 8 investments this evening, Mr. President, starting off with Royal Industrial from China, who are today committing an investment of 280 million rand in the manufacturing of porcelain tiles in Gauteng. Ladies and gentlemen, LVSA Group, a black industrialist, is investing today 204 million rand in the production of valves in KZN. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm moving on to DeFi, a subsidiary of Turkey's Arçelik, who today are committing an investment of 317 million rand in white goods manufacturing in KwaZulu-Natal. Ladies and gentlemen, we're turning our focus to the Ardak Group from Ireland and Consol, who are investing 1.5 billion rand in a new glass container production facility in Gauteng. Ladies and gentlemen, we're moving to Finland now. Huhtamäki today is committing their investment of 150 million rand towards the expansion of their packaging and manufacturing plant in KZN. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm moving on to Isanti Glass, a black industrialist investing 496 million in a glass manufacturing plant in Gauteng. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. I hope you heard that, Mr. President. I heard someone saying in the back, we need more women, and certainly that is the call. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm moving on to Tetra Pak, my apologies, from Sweden, who are today committing their investment of 500 million rand in the expansion of the Tetra Pak manufacturing facility in KZN. I think she deserves a round of applause. Yes, ma'am. Ladies and gentlemen, we are closing this group off with US multinational Procter & Gamble, who are today committing their investment of a further 450 million rand towards the expansion of their diaper plant in Gauteng. Ladies and gentlemen, that wraps up the sector titled Other Manufacturing, but it leads us beautifully to business process outsourcing, ICT, and digital services, Mr. President, where we're going to be highlighting 6 investments this evening. Starting off, ladies and gentlemen, from the United Kingdom, Sigma International is investing 267 million rand in the global business services sector in the Western Cape. I appreciate your brisk run, sir. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, we're moving on to Terraco. Terraco is committing a further 1.1 billion rand towards the construction of a data center in Gauteng and a renewable energy power generation for their facilities across the country. And we make our way to Pakistan, ladies and gentlemen. Airlift from Pakistan is investing 300 million rand in the e-commerce sector in Gauteng and the Western Cape. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, we move on to DD Global, who are today investing in a new e-hailing platform across South Africa. Can we give them a round of applause as well? Mr. President, we're rounding off this group of business process outsourcing, ICT, and digital services with Time Bank, who continues to expand their digital banking offering in South Africa, and today do that with 1.1 billion rand. They are not here this evening, but we do, of course, acknowledge. We are now moving on to our SEZs, or Special Economic Zones. Mr. President, we have 8 investments we'd like to highlight in this particular area. And I'm going to start off with a triad. These are 3 black industrialist companies who are investing in the Dube trade port in KwaZulu-Natal. LM Diapers is investing 75 million rand in the manufacturing of baby nappies. Smartway is investing 139 million rand in the manufacturing of TVs and mobile devices. And Synergy Blenders is investing 94 million rand in producing ingredients for the FMCG sector. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Thank you for observing the COVID protocol. Appreciate it. Mr. President, we stay in this sector, and again, we call up 3 companies who are investing in the Saldanha Bay Industrial Development Zone in the Western Cape. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to acknowledge African Quartz, a black industrialist investing 1.5 billion rand in a PV manufacturing plant. I think we can give a round of applause to acknowledge Ancora Enterprises, yet another black industrialist investing 1.8 billion in shipbuilding and repair. And Cape Ocean Terminals is today committing 2 billion rand towards construction of a bulk fuel storage terminal. Ladies and gentlemen, can we give them all a round of applause, please? ladies and gentlemen, rounding up this group of special economic zones, we're going to the Atlantis Special Economic Zone in the Western Cape. Everflow is investing 65 million rand in industrial refrigeration and green power microgrid systems for cooling. And Swartland Insulation is investing 106 million rand in an extruded polystyrene manufacturing plant. I do believe that we don't have representatives this evening, but can we please give them a round of applause in absentia? Mr. President, returning now to small business investment, because we know that the investment mobilization drive, the call was answered not only by big business, but small business alike. And so, SEFA, ladies and gentlemen, tonight committing 2.3 billion rand. And the NEF, the NEF, ladies and gentlemen, at 2.5 billion rand, please. We don't seem to have the National Empowerment Fund or SEFA with us, Mr. President, but I do. That is, please come up, Madam. Minister, thank you. Thank you, Minister. Thank you very much, Minister. Mr. President, we're closing it off with government funding. The work of a number of government departments and institutions, ladies and gentlemen, have helped to attract investment in South Africa, either by unlocking their own funding or through the execution of their mandates. And these include the following: the Industrial Development Corporation support for companies, black industrialists and SMMEs to the value of 20.1 billion rand. Mr. President is saying, please don't be shy. IDC, if you could come up and let's acknowledge you, please. Thank you very much. And then, of course, we continue with incentives by government, particularly for innovative technologies, brings investment to the value of 6 billion rand. A round of applause, please, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. President, we're closing it off with the work of our Trade Administration Agency, who have also assisted to unlock investment in manufacturing facilities and infrastructure. And that today is to the value of 427 million rand. Ladies and gentlemen, can we have a round of applause? Mr. President, that concludes the investment announcements for this 4th South African Investment Conference. I'm going to yield the stage to you, Your Excellency, as you reflect and respond to what we've heard today. Ladies and gentlemen, I will be back on stage to share some of the announcements around the dinner arrangements, and kindly request for you to please keep your seats once the President has addressed us. Thank you very much, Your Excellency.
Thank you very much, Program Director, ministers, business leaders, Dr. Adesina, premiers, and especially the Premier of the Gauteng province, who has been our host and has been with us all day. He dashed out for a minute to go and oversee the passing of the Township Economy Bill, which is now an act in the provincial legislature of Gauteng. Let's give him a round of applause. And I extend my greetings once again to all of you, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests. We have effectively come to the end of another, what I would regard as a very successful South African investment conference. It is a success that we relish, all the more because it is taking place in the midst of a global pandemic, a pandemic that has dampened the global investment climate for 2 years. I'm greatly energized by the enthusiasm, but let me add as well as the optimism of the investors and business leaders, those who have spoken on the stage, in panels, in the various breakaway rooms, but also those who have been chit-chatting with some of us as we've been passing each other in the passages and the corridors. I could feel, and you exuded, a spirit of great optimism and hope. You are essentially confident that South Africa is on the right track, despite all the challenges that we face. You see immense potential in both the traditional and emerging sectors of our economy. What has also been encouraging is that you share the belief that South Africa cannot be prosperous without a prosperous continent, our beloved continent, Africa. And that investing in African economies is essential to the continent's development and progress. And that is why we brought Dr. Adesina here to be with us today, because in many ways, the bank is the repository of a lot of investments that take place on our continent. We've held constructive engagements in the spirit of common purpose, and I agree wholeheartedly with those who said that South Africa's COVID response has been a great example of how government, business, as well as civil society and labor can come together to resolve a challenge, and may I say a life-threatening challenge and an economy destruction or destroying challenge. And at the same time, the approach that we have had was to guide our economic growth and investment promotion efforts. That is why such conferences as this one are so important. Some commentators and journalists over TV, as I was watching, were saying, what's the use of all these conferences? Because the businesses were going to invest anyway. And it may well be true that they were going to invest, but as people, companies, and countries, we have a herd mentality type of DNA in us. As we see others rushing and moving in a particular direction, so we all join. So this conference also encourages those who may or may not be here to have confidence, to ask themselves, what is it that those who are investing see? And they follow suit. And I believe that many of you who are here, who are making your investments, you are investing because you're emulating some who have gone before you, some who have invested, and some have been investing in this market for 104 years, and some even earlier, and they are still here, and they become the leaders of that herd, and everyone else follows. So the value of these conferences is immense, because it does get people to see that South Africa is an investable destination, and we are indeed open for business and open for investments. And thank you very much for your investments today. Now, these occasions not only give investors a glimpse of what South Africa has to offer, but having us all in this room enables frank exchanges on exactly what the challenges are and how we can best resolve them. As some of the investors came upstage here, you saw me exchanging words with them, they were whispering in my ear and saying, Mr. President, we would like this and this to be opened. This type of legislation, this type of permitting should be done. And that is what the value of this is all about. So, were they lobbying? I don't know, but they were talking to me. 4 years ago, we set ourselves an ambitious target of raising 1.3 trillion rand, 1.2 trillion rand rather, over a 5-year period. The 80 investment pledges at today's conference come to a total of 332 billion rand. That was announced today. Now, if you are like me and you add up sums very quickly, with the pledges we have received today, and with the cancellations and additions we have heard about from investors in previous conferences, we've now taken the total level of investment pledge at the 4th investment conference to 1.14 trillion rand. Now, with just 1 year left to go, we have now reached 95% of the ambitious target that we set 4 years ago. What this means is that we now only have 60 billion rand short of our target to hit 1.2 trillion rand. Is that not a great achievement already? Now, I'm not a soothsayer or a magician or a prophet. I expect that by next year we will not only reach our target, but we are going to exceed that target of 1.2 trillion rand. The investment commitments that have been made here today are most impressive. They're impressive not only by virtue of their cumulative value of the investments themselves, but also by the sheer number and diversity of projects that they represent. Today, we've had commitments from many companies based here in South Africa, but also companies from a number of countries. And it's important that I should mention some of these countries, because there's been this notion that we're losing traction, the world is turning against us and all that. Now, the companies that have come forward to make pledges come from countries such as Belgium, Canada, China, the Czech Republic, Finland, France, Germany, Ireland, Mauritius, Norway, Pakistan, Sweden, Turkey, the United Arab Emirates, the United States, and the United Kingdom. That is a good collection of countries to have as your investors. Now, the sectors are in renewable energy projects, and we have the plans that will build some of the components that these projects will use. So some of these plans already exist in various parts of our country, from biogas to solar, from wind to battery storage. These investments are at the cutting edge of one of the most important growth industries in South Africa. There are investments that are breathing new life into mining, one of the country's oldest industries, and still one of the most important. Some had suggested that mining in South Africa is a sunset industry, but today's pledges, and some of the pledges we've had in the past, are a clear demonstration that mining in South Africa is indeed on the resurgence, and it is a sunrise industry. Through these investments, we will be expanding our production of the platinum metal group and other minerals that are vital to the emerging technologies of the future. It is pleasing that there are several investments in metal fabrication, as we saw here, and other manufacturing. The investments in steel, vanadium, aluminum, and other manufacturing plants all contribute to our ongoing effort to add value to the minerals that we mine and to create jobs that would otherwise have gone to more industrialized countries. We've been talking about beneficiation for a number of years, and having spoken about it, preached about it, we're beginning now to see more and more fruition. we have heard about investments that are giving effect to our ambition to produce our own vaccines and other pharmaceuticals, both for our country and for our continent, Africa. We're excited about the investments in our film, design, and other creative industries, where there is huge untapped potential and more than enough talent. I had the occasion just last week to go, or was it this week, to go to the Cape Town Film Studios and heard about how Netflix has committed, and it was announced earlier, quite a lot of money to produce some of their series and cartoons and all those things here in South Africa. But I also had the great privilege of talking to Anand Singh, one of our country's great film makers and producers, and he is here today with us. And he's building a huge studio in Durban, and he told me about billions that he's going to be investing. And I said, Anand, come to the conference. And he was supposed to go to some big conference or award evening in Lausanne in Switzerland, and he ditched them for us. And I'm glad that he's here with us. So Anand, thank you very much, but also thank you for the commitment that you and others in the creative industries are demonstrating to our country. This is one of the areas that I've also spoken about, even in State of the Nation addresses, about creating these new industries, supporting those who are in those industries, and ensuring that we create a very good environment for people like Anand Singh, who struggled for quite some years to get the piece of land, which should never have happened, but finally it is all settled, and the studio worth more than 7.5 billion rand is now going to go on. And it's going to create thousands and thousands of jobs in Durban, in KZN, which is much needed. Today we've had confirmation of the export potential of the country's automotive sector and its continued contribution to developing emerging businesses through its value chain. And I had occasion when we opened one of those automotive centers, I think it was the SEZ here and with Premier Makura, to hear how this company is actually going to be supporting almost 200 small and medium enterprises from the townships, from Mamelodi and the surrounding areas. And already they are dealing with those companies and creating great value and creating good jobs. We welcome the investments in infrastructure and logistics, in property and telecommunications, which will help expand the capacity of our economy and improve its competitiveness. We have seen investment commitments in agriculture, our oldest industry, and in the digital economy, our newest. In the course of this investment conference, we've been given a sense of the value and potential of our special economic zones and of the important role that our development finance institutions and other funding agencies have in promoting growth and transformation. This investment conference has also provided us with a glimpse into the South African economy of the future, an economy that is rich and diverse and growing. It is pleasing that a number of investors here have spoken either on the platforms or in other places of conversation of the need to develop the skills of young people and to empower the women of our country. I want to thank you all for your attendance, for the investments, commitments that you have made, but above all, for being here as a demonstration of faith in this country. I want to thank the sponsors for their generosity. I met some of you last night, and I'd like to thank you because you help to make these conferences very successful. And these are Anglo-American, Naspers, Vodacom, Exaro, South African breweries, Huawei, and Discovery. I also want to thank our partners, the IDC, Invest SA, and Proudly South Africa. But I also want to thank the Minister of Trade and Industry and Competition, Minister Ibrahim Patel, as well as the other ministers who serve on the Ministerial Committee, who have been working behind the scenes since the middle of last year to ensure that this conference succeeds. There was a time, yes, let's give them a round of applause. There was a time when I thought that COVID-19 had really dealt a devastating blow against these types of conferences where we bring investors together, but they soldiered on. Ministers continued meeting behind the scenes and making sure that this conference does take place. So when they brought it to cabinet and said we are proceeding, I was truly pleasantly surprised. So thank you, and give them a round of applause again. Now, I also have to give a special word of thank you to our investment envoys. When we appointed the investment envoys, people just sort of dismissed it and said, we're just adding people, and you rely on people outside and all that. And I felt that we needed to have people who will play a particular special role, some of whom who are in business and some of whom who have been in government. And in their new roles, they play an incredibly positive and dynamic role. And they are Pumzile Langeni, Jaco Marie, Mkebisi Jonas, Trevor Manuel, Derek Hanekom, and Jeff Khadebe. I thank them for their commitment that they have continued to show, interacting with our investors, both here and offshore, and also fielding tough and difficult questions from investors and presenting the many opportunities of our country and always being very positive. Thank you very much, colleagues, for the work that you do. Now, I also want to thank the other people who really get things done. My economic advisor, Trudy Makaya, and the organizing committee, and all the government departments, agencies, and entities that have contributed to the success of this conference. Thanks should also go to our partners in business, in labor, and civil society for the positive and proactive spirit that they have brought to the organizing process and for supporting the conference and its objectives. And of course, I'd like to thank the media as well for being here and for beaming the proceedings of this conference throughout the day, and those who've been streaming it and those who've been following it online, enabled by our media participants. So thank you very much. In conclusion, I want to recall what Adrian Gore, the CEO of Discovery, said this morning. He said, we're having a tough time, but the future will be better. We must take a long-term view and must change the narrative. Changing the narrative about South Africa is really at the core of what we all need to do collectively, as government, as business, as labor, and community leaders. We are all in this together, and I'd like to thank you for standing by South Africa, standing by the people of South Africa as we recover. Not recover, as we recover and rebuild. As we build an economy that is diverse, that's vibrant, that is sustainable, and that benefits all the people of this great land. So thank you very much for making this conference successful and making South Africa peep into the future with great hope, knowing that we will indeed become the prosperous country that Nelson Mandela envisaged. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you.
I want to also say thank you to our program director. She's just been outstanding. You've blown my mind. You've blown me completely. So I'd like you to take you along with me wherever I go to be program director.
Yes,
but
sir.
you're too busy. You will not be able to do it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, just one or two announcements. Thank you very much for your attention. I promise to keep you only for 30 seconds. Starting off with a quick reminder that the President is hosting dinner. Dinner starts at 1900 hours sharp. We are kindly requesting that you might make your way to the 5th floor by 18:45 to be seated so that we can start promptly at 7 p.m. We are going to have an excellent time this evening. We have a special guest, South African-born, renowned global investor, Dr. Patrick Soon-Shiong is going to be with us. You don't want to miss the fireside chat with him. We're also going to have a small business awards ceremony, lots to celebrate this evening, and I'm certain that you want to be a part of those celebrations. And so, ladies and gentlemen, between now and then, we invite you for some refreshments, once again on the ground floor, and to see you at 18:45 on the 5th floor. You will be in the capable hands of my colleague and brother, Undumiso Hadebe. For myself, Nozipho Shabalala, ngiyabonga.